Good evening, I'm Ben Stykuc, and today for Asian Movie Pulse, I'm taking a trip back to 1973 with the upcoming release on Blu-ray from Eureka Entertainment of When Taekwondo Strikes, the third in a sort of loose trilogy of movies that starred Angela Mao and directed by Huang Feng. The previous two being 1971's Lady Whirlwind and 1972's Hapkido, both previously released on Blu-ray via Eureka Entertainment last year. When Taekwondo Strikes is very much of its time, but is also a very interesting movie to look back on, given the context on which it was made. Over the sort of early 70s, we were seeing a gradual development of martial arts films. If you ever sat through the Chinese boxer and the Jimmy Wang Yu swingy arm style, was slowly starting to be evolved into something more fluid, more kinetic. And largely that was thanks due to the arrival of a bunch of Korean super kickers who were going to make their name in the industry over that coming decade. You'd have people like Casanova Wong, the immortal Huang Li, or as you would probably see in a number of these movies, particularly the one we're talking about today, Huang In-shik, the Korean super kicker who was sort of probably best known for appearing opposite Bruce Lee in Where the Dragon, but was to go on to have a very, very good career in Hong Kong, and is one of the sort of adversaries that we see heading towards the final confrontation in When Taekwondo Strikes. It's an unusual film also in its casting. We see the lead, Yun Ri, who was to become the founder of American Taekwondo, in his first and only lead role, in fact his only sort of cinematic role. He'd been a contemporary of Bruce Lee, and that was one of the reasons why he sort of fell out of the industry in the 70s past Bruce Lee's demise. And so he's cast here as a sort of Korean rebel, and we're in that sort of era of Japanese dominance of both Korea and China, so they're always the bad guys, always completely malevolent, no redeeming features whatsoever. So he's part of the rebellion that we see. The film is introduced, though, initially to another one of people that regularly sort of crops up in Huang Feng movies and is a staple feature of most martial arts movies of the time, that of the great Carter Wong. If you've never met him or seen him before, you're guaranteed to recognise him as the incredible eyebrows that he has, but he's best known to most audiences for his appearance in Big Trouble in Little China. We are introduced to him getting absolute tar beaten out of him by sort of Japanese Ronin samurai characters that are taking exception to his comments about sort of the Japanese. It leads into him escaping into a church where we're introduced to Father Lewis and also his niece Mary, who is one of the congregation. What makes this particular bit stand out is one of the rarity it is in Hong Kong cinema of the 1970s, and for a lot of Hong Kong cinema in general, in that whenever we tend to see Western characters in action cinema, they tend to be sort of sitting in the background to a degree, or sort of politicians, officials overseeing what's going on and on the sidelines, or they're the Guido, the bad guy that's brought in for the final real battle with the martial arts lead. And not so much here, and this is one of those early times where we get to see a bit almost like a Troy Hart kind of moment, where you get the priest who's kind of given credit for his own sense of virtue. He's not worried about what the Japanese might do to him, harbouring sort of the Koreans. He's more sort of sticking to his own principles and his belief in God, which is why he can't leave the church. But then we get something really unexpected. If you're not really familiar with the sort of kind of industry at the time, And that is the niece Mary, played by Anne Hinton in her feature film debut. And Anne Winton, who would only go to make 2 movies, the first and the second, a Bruce Lee exploitation movie, before sadly dying in horrible circumstances in 1982, suddenly unleashes a whole load of Taekwondo moves. And we're kind of sort of going, oh wow, that's new. I'm not expecting this to suddenly come out of anywhere where this happened, because we get sort of female characters that are quite strong. I mean, this is an Angela Mao movie that we're going to be talking about very shortly, but very rare do we get a Western female actress cutting loose. I mean, we got it in the 80s with Cynthia Rothrock and occasional sort of Kimmery Pens and Karen Shepherds, etc. But this is 1973. I mean, we've just got through Chang Pei Pei and the Chang Che masterisation of the industry from Shaw Brothers' side, and we were getting rid of all the female characters. You get someone from the West suddenly cutting loose, that's quite a surprise. And unsurprisingly, given obviously how he's in pretty much every martial arts movie ever made, it sometimes feels like, she's squaring off against Summer Hung. And in the second fight on there, and you're going, wow, this is really, really different. So we're getting a Summer Hung duel from 1973, where he's got this shockingly awful wig, playing the sort of Japanese heavy, as he was his wont back then, against a Western fighter who looks like she can actually genuinely fight. So it was a really good thing to sort of see, very progressive. We get to this particular point, and the Carter Wong has escaped along with Anne Winton, and they've sort of gone back to Lin, played by Yoon Ri, the Taekwondo exponent, his sort of residence. And we get introduced to our central female lead, Angela Mao. Those watching this are probably familiar with her work from the 70s, best known for being in Enter the Dragon as the sister that leads Bruce Lee's character on the path of revenge. But the early 70s, she was the queen of the martial arts, and a justifiably earned title when you watch her performances, and particularly the intensity of her fight sequences. She's playing Huang, a Chinese local that was raised in Seoul. So to explain her presence in Korea for the purposes of this movie. And she's asked by Lee to go and check in, see what's happened to the priest, and to see what's going on, which results in her coming into conflict with poor Sammo, who really gets an absolute pounding in this movie, and the rest of the Japanese expendable Ronin that are there to basically get obliterated by her when she sort of cuts loose. From here, the sort of two kind of sort of stories sort of merge a bit more closely, as ultimately Lee decides to go and trade places with the father in order for him to be released, after finding out that Mary has visited the Japanese to sort of see him, and this is what's been told needs to be done. His imminent capture leads to the Japanese having a plan to sort of get rid of all the other sort of supporters by taking him over to Manchuria. Logic not necessarily the strongest point of this plan, to entice out the rest of the rebels. We know how this is going to end, with a massive scrap, which, again, exceptionally choreographed for its time and very hard hitting. What we get is something even more interesting. Now, I've talked about Angela Mao in this movie, and in the previous film, Hapkido, again, she, like Carter Wong, they're built up as very capable protagonists, but ultimately the master will step in for the final wheel. And here it kind of looks like it's going to go that way again. But throughout the movie, they've shot her upwards, looking up, so the sort of hero kind of look when they're sort of marching on camera and stuff on there. So they've really built her up on a par with everyone else. And we've got the final reel kicking off. Anne Winton and Carter Wong have fought in to try and free Lee, but they've been surrounded because they're the supporting cast. They're losing. And then Angela Mao materialises from out left centre. Looks really impressive. I'm going to be here. I'm going to save the day. We have the square off. We've got Huang sick, and we've also got Kenji. I can never say this name. Kenji Kazama. If I pronounced that wrong, I apologise. Up against her, and she's holding her own. But numbers obviously take their toll, and Yoon Lee managed to sort of break through most of his chains. He's still chained up, looking very much like Donnie Yen in Tiger Cage 2, with his arms in chains but using his kicking skills. So 2-on-2, and then we eventually come down to the final face-off, the one remaining bad guy. Now, Angela Mao's been holding her own, and all of a sudden Lee steps in. And we're thinking, here we go again. We're going to have the male lead taking over from the female lead for the purposes of the finale. But it's not quite that way. It's not as straightforward as sometimes it can materialise, because here it's a battle of national pride. He says, would you mind stepping away? This is Korean business, Korean on Korean. Because she's Chinese, we've got a national duty to sort of square off here. And she acquiesces and steps aside. But whereas in Hapkido, it kind of made her look a bit weaker, and so the focus is on the sort of the Grandmaster's duel. Here, it's a level pegging. Asking you to step aside is a battle of national pride, not an ability, but this is a national scrap that we need to have done now. And it makes her look that much more powerful. Throughout the second half, she's been the instigator. She's the mature one. Carter Wong and Anne Hinton want to just rush on in, take revenge, rescue their uncle. They just very impetuous, whereas she is more steely-eyed and focused. When it comes to the climax, again, she gives the impression she's in control. She's taking charge of the situation. It's not what we're familiar with in this particular time of the industry, and it's very refreshing and it's very powerful. The movie itself, it's an odd sort of setup in the way of the looks. When we open the opening sequences, we very much get the Clearwater Bay background. We're familiar with so many martial arts movies over the years when they're doing the traditional poses as opening credits go. We also get a sort of studio set, which for a Golden Harvest movie kind of having sort of Shaw Brothers flashbacks just for a minute, and again it looked kind of a little bit out of place. You know, in Ree, it's hard to really sort of describe him as a performer. He only had one role, and it's very much the master role. He's always in control. We have the occasional moments of emotion. To sort of really talk about him from an acting standpoint, it's difficult to really kind of do. We've got nothing to compare it against. In terms of athletic prowess, given the limitations that we had in the 70s, looks stunning. He clearly shows off his Taekwondo his skills exceptionally. You just kind of wish he had a little bit more opportunities to cut loose, really, on that. It's more a supporting role here. The focus is very much once she's introduced on Angela Mao. Carter Wong seems to have been kind of stuck in his sidekick role for a lot of the early 70s on that bit, sort of backing up Kwantak King and the Skyhawk, Angela Mao and Hapkido, etc. Plays what he does well. Always incredibly serious. I'm convinced the man can't crack a smile or his eyebrows will crack. But again, is perfectly solid in that position. And I was, again, impressed with Mary Mary, Anne Hinton, who, again, it's just a pity he didn't get more of a career. I mean, Anne Hinton clearly had the skills and the acting talent, and obviously the connection with the Western audiences, with the marketing, would have been fantastic. But it's just something you're not expecting to see, which just elevates it more. Huang Feng, pretty much is less known these days as a director on there. We had always the great martial arts movies from the sort of 70s and the 80s, and we know our Chang Chehs, our Lau Garlongs, even sadly sometimes Lo Wei, for better or for worse. But Huang Feng probably doesn't have as much of a cachet in terms of name-wise. Sammo Hung obviously would go on to a massive, huge career as one of the greatest choreographer, actor, action stars of the industry's ever seen. And does attribute, obviously, a lot of the work he does with Huang Feng back then. But so it's kind of just a pity that he's been lost in the midst of time, and hopefully, as we get the rediscoveries of these films on Blu-ray, now here in the UK, with the imminent releases, that we sort of get to see someone who was very capable of what he did. He knew how to involve the action choreography, but blend it into quite an impactful sort of narrative too. Watching the film, as again for 1973, it's also a little spot the upcoming stars. Now, as we know, Sammo Hung is in it, but also a lot of the industry stuntmen at the time would go on to quite fruitful careers, and Yuen Bu can be spotted in this movie. Also, eagle-eyed observers will obviously see Lam Ching Ying, obviously a bit more visible in one particular sequence too. So there's a nice little game of sort of playing alongside this when you're watching the film. This is one of the best martial arts movies in the early 70s. Very strong female character, very strong characterization, some exceptional martial arts that really get to showcase Taekwondo at its best. Narrative, bit cliched, one of those things, we're going to go with those, but from a pure entertainment perspective, incredibly enjoyable. And also Angela Mao, Lady Whirlwind, couldn't ask for a better showcase on this one. When the minute she comes on screen, she dominates, gets all the best action, all the best lines. If it's worth watching for one thing, watch it for her. Absolute classic, can't recommend it enough.